It takes a little bit of insanity to have the kind of dream where you're like, hey, I will have no plan B and I just want to like go with the flow and see whether this works out or not. I've seen this in some interview where an Indian actor has said that actors are actually paid to wait. When you're 8 years old and you're told, okay, you're no longer going to see your friends and this is all pre-social media, it's heartbreak. An acting coach once told me is that if you weren't nervous, means you don't care about it and the stakes aren't high enough. So we see a rejection as won't happen, not now. I always took it as a not yet. That not yet just says that we'll try again tomorrow. So when I came to Bombay, it took a lot longer than what I imagined. I thought आके 1 महीने में हो जाएगा, but then you realize यहाँ पर घर ढूंढने में ही 3-4 महीने निकल जाते हैं.
Welcome to Take a Pause with me, Varun Duggirala. So the first question is always the interesting one. I also had to figure out how do you start these things off.
Yeah.
And I always find that the best way to start these conversations is to ask about how you were as a kid.
I see we're going like straight into the deep end. So as a kid, my dad used to be with the Indian Air Force, and as anyone who's grown up in the defense knows, like what that means is that you move every 2 years. And I always envy people who manage to pinpoint to say that, hey, I was an extrovert as a kid or I was an introvert, because I, for the longest time, couldn't figure out what I was. What moving every 2 years needed of you is to instantly blend into the next environment. It was also very unsettling. I hated it. And so I was just like this person who now in hindsight, I feel was constantly having to play a part in order to fit into the next environment, because the kind of towns that my dad was posted in, I grew up in Gwalior in Madhya Pradesh, in Allahabad in UP, Chandigarh. We were in Jamnagar in Gujarat, Wellington in Tamil Nadu, and then finally in Delhi. And so you've got like this all India upbringing, which really helps now. But when you're 8 years old and you're told, okay, you're no longer going to see your friends, and this is all pre-social media, it's heartbreak. So I was this gypsy kid, if I may call it that, as someone who like picked up and moved with his family, constantly trying to find his place. And it was unsettling and sort of puts you in existential mode really quickly. But what I was very good at was making friends the minute you got to a place.
It's also interesting you said that people say, no, I'm an extrovert, I'm an introvert.
Yeah.
And we're all on this spectrum.
Yeah.
Where I feel sometimes that you can be an extrovert but really need time for yourself. So you're not necessarily only doing that all the time.
Yeah.
And the reason I start with childhood always is that, and this is something which I've come to realize over many, many conversations, is that that's the root of what we are. Like smaller things that happened to us when we were kids, even larger stuff, just the way we interact with the world, what we enjoy doing. Eventually we circle back to doing those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Like in acting school, you're sort of taught like your personality is formed between your ages of 1 and 10.
Yeah.
Everything that happens after that, you're sort of responding to or adapting. Which is why like spending those years between 1 and 10 in a different place every 2 years, you've got this montage of experiences to draw from. So it was a confusing childhood, if I may use that. And I realized very quickly like what the word ambivert means. It means that you can be an extrovert when you need to, but you also enjoy your own own sort of space. Yeah. And a saying that I mean, you keep, when you scroll, you come across those memes that you relate to constantly, and to say that I'm not antisocial, I'm socially selective. And I think that's the phase I'm in life now, is that I'm very happy to say, no guys, like, I mean, this scene looks fun, but I'd rather have some time to myself at the moment.
Were you always, did saying no come to you that easily always?
Not at all. I feel it sort of comes with, everyone's been through that. I identify, if I may use that term, as a Delhi kid. And so you go through your phase of, hey, I have to be at every party, I have to be at every club. And it's a crazy phase. And I feel you have to go through that end in order to come out the end where you feel like, okay, I've got to draw that balance of this is my time. So I finished school in Delhi. I went to college over there. I then went on to study film and media in Melbourne. And so just having like all of these travel and experiences where you are just doing it for the fun of it, because it's just so much fun. You don't know who you're going to meet. You don't know what are the conversations you're going to have. So having done that, to say, hey man, I'm happier just like maybe meeting people once every 10 days.
I feel what also comes out of that is the fact that you keep meeting different people. I feel that your 20s is when you're like on this overdrive of I want to meet as many people as possible. I want to catch up with as many people as possible. And at some point, you also come to realize that you're honing that down to a smaller set. And then you also, I feel, at some point realize that, wait 1 second, there's no time for myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
You get so overcrowded with the world and what it throws at you that you are like, okay, waste time for me. And I'd assume, because I have tried. I'm not a good actor.
Oh, you've tried?
Wow,
I did not know that. Wow.
Bad idea. Is spending time with yourself a part of the process of being an actor?
Definitely. Like you need to know yourself, because you're like, when you're playing a part, and one of the things I said to you off camera before we started this, it's so amazing to be able to do an interview where you're not promoting something, because I'm very aware, and I think most actors are, that when you're in the promotion phase of things, you're on a marketing campaign, and then you're into, hey, this is what it took to do the part, and these were my experiences on set, and you should watch this because of X, Y, and Z. But like, you're not in that at the moment. And so it feels like you're not wearing that mask, but you have to know that boundary of like, when does the mask come off, and when are you yourself? And for that, there's no one way. For me, what works is spending time with myself. For some people, it might be traveling with friends or going and meeting family. But definitely, part of the process is to sort of spend time with yourself. And to circle back to what you were saying earlier, I think the 20s is about that. Is about like maximizing your experience of life. And in fact, one of the things they tell you when you go to acting school is that you can only draw from real experiences. Of course, you can like watch great series and watch great films and try and connect and figure out what choices that actor made. But if you have something to draw from, it only makes you that much of a more, what's the word I'm looking for? It just gives that much more depth to what you're doing. And I was in a very, very lucky position. My dad had just moved from the Indian Air Force and gone into civil aviation. And I was doing a sort of part-time job after college. And one of the perks of civil aviation was that your family gets tickets.
Yeah.
And so I would do this job, save up money, and then I would get international tickets from my dad in my early 20s. And before travel influencers and what's the word, wanderlust became a thing, I had a backpack on, pre-mobile phones, and was doing it to stop for sound and going out and living in hostels and spending time meeting different people all over Europe. And it was just a crazy experience, because these were the days like before you could Google top 10 things to do in Amsterdam or top 5 things. You would actually meet people in cafes and say, oh, how long have you been traveling? Tell me the cool places that you've been to. And you would then go on to add them on Facebook or whatever it is you had at that time. And you would remain in touch through the year. And if you ever traveled to the same place again, you would meet them. It was sort of our generation's version of pen pals, if you want to call it that. And it was, I feel like I got as much out of life at that point and of what I use in acting as I would now spending time by myself. So it comes back to your original question of, is spending time with yourself an essential part? Yes, but in conjunction with a lot of this other stuff.
It's also, I feel, because we didn't have it, the tendency to go up to someone and talk to them and ask them a question was far more. Like now, like, I don't remember the last time I asked someone for directions, because like you go to Google Maps, right? Or the fact that, okay, what's a good place to go here? For me, it used to be when I used to work in television, would just like finish a long schedule, get into like a bus, go to Goa, and just like ask someone where I could stay, and just find like a spot to kind of stay in, and then just roam around that. And those experiences, conversations would be stuff you kind of store at the back of your head to maybe use in different cases.
Yeah.
Do you think that happens?
No, for sure. And that's sometimes you meet the most interesting people at that point. And I've always been a solo traveler. So
explain solo traveling for people who don't get it. We've had people who are like, why would I travel by myself?
Again, you have to be that kind of person. Solo travel would be where you book to a destination. Let's say you're going to Goa. You don't have a fixed plan, but you just know that you're going to go to place X and then see how it goes. Do you want to spend time by yourself just reading, or do you want to meet interesting people? I'm talking about the early 20s. I'm not so sure I would like do it. Actually, I would. And you go with the flow, but you have to be comfortable with spending time by yourself, which I feel like when people say, I would never do that, are people who do not enjoy that for whatever reason that they have to eventually arrive at. But I always loved it, because some of the most interesting people I've met is a result of, I'm a coffee person, and I would say, hey, where's the best coffee that you've had? And then he or she would be like, hey, I'm going to Cafe X in wherever. It could be in Brussels or it could be in Goa. And you would go with them and then you would have a chat and then keep in touch if it goes well and not with. And you have to be open to experience, I feel, to be a solo traveler.
Taking a bit of a detour here. At which point did this space of, let's say, acting, films, everything else, when did that become a thing for you to early, or was it like a later on thing?
Sort of circles back to the point when you said what were you like as a child. I realized very quickly that I was the sort of person who was more comfortable and more himself when he was on a stage performing than he was in a bunch of people. And I don't know what psychological condition this sort of relates to, but that was just me. I was just more comfortable in the spotlight than I was if you put me in a room full of 10 people who I didn't know. I'm great one-on-one or with a small bunch of people who I know. But realizing that and saying that I really have fun doing that. And, as a kid, it starts off with like fancy dress competitions or poetry competitions in school or random stuff like that. And then gradually it goes to debate competitions and it becomes dramatics in school or college. And from there, I took my first acting class, which was with Barry John, who was in Delhi at the time. And you realize that, and I was always sort of average academically and sort of average to above average in sports. But when I did this and when an acting coach told you, hey, you're good, and that was just encouragement from a authority figure. And because you've heard of him with Manoj Bajpayee and with Shah Rukh Khan, it's sort of the bulb goes off to say, this is something that I've got an instinct for and I can build on. And that's where the thought came in. I wasn't one of those kids where at your age of 10, you've told everyone ki main bada hoke actor banunga. It was something that you gradually build the confidence up towards. And then at your age of about 22, say that it's sort of now or never.
So was there a plan B?
Never. No, there wasn't. Because I just feel like if there is, then you're not giving plan A as much. So when I came to Bombay, it was with that classic sort of dream of main aakar, I'm going to do movies and I'm going to be with Dharma or with YRF. It took a lot longer than what I imagined. I thought आके 1 महीने में हो जाएगा, but then you realize यहाँ पर घर ढूंढने में ही 3-4 महीने निकल जाते हैं. So it does take a lot longer than that one imagines. But I feel now when people ask me what were you thinking, it takes a little bit of insanity to have the kind of dream where you're like, hey, I will have no plan B and I just want to go with the flow and see whether this works out or not. So it's got some planning, some prep, but a little bit of crazy mixed in it.
No, I'm just kind of adding up a bunch of the stuff you've spoken about, right? The fact that you had almost, the fact that you had to kind of keep moving also kind of builds independence, right? In your head, you're and doing what you do requires you to be extremely centered around yourself as an individual. Because otherwise, I'm gathering can be a lot of things to kind of work around with, and yet you have to perform your craft.
Yeah,
once you kind of you got to switch off one part and switch on one part. Do you find that switch off, switch on easy?
I think you're giving my childhood a lot of undue sort of more credit than it deserves, because there was no such master plan in mind. I said this is what will teach me. But what I really feel about Bombay, and I'm sure you've experienced this because we spoke a bit about your entrepreneurial journey and all that, is that Bombay has a way of teaching you. Mumbai has a way of teaching you. And I feel the beauty of this city is that it tests you. And if you've come with a shallow perspective, and everyone has different reasons for why they want to come to Bombay, and why acting in particular, it's got the lure of fame, it's got the lure of money, it's got the lure of what you've seen as a kid growing up. It tests those ideologies, and if that's all you're here for, you get weeded out so fast, because you realize that you came thinking that this will require X, but what you need is 10X of that. And so it was in the discovery of that 10X that a lot of the therav that you're talking about, of the introspection and the patience comes into play. And I think that's something that even the transition of studying abroad gave me a lot, because when you grow up in an Indian family, you've just got such a support system that you do not even realize, whether it's domestic help or whether it's living in a family. You've got extended family in Delhi. So moving to a place where you have to, and I know this sounds trivial, but when you're buying your own groceries, washing your own dishes, you got to wash your own clothes, put them out, you're mowing the lawn and all of this before you get to an 8 a.m. class. Sort of teaches you independence in a way that no experience in India had ever taught me before. So it was a mix of all the moving around, having studied abroad, and the school of hard knocks in Bombay that sort of teaches you that, hey man, if you want to play the long game, you've got to be patient with yourself, and just like you've got to be in it to win it for the long haul.
It's interesting you said the school of hard knocks, right? Because it requires patience to keep going through those knocks and kind of coming through it, but it also requires you to constantly also kind of recalibrate and reevaluate. You're not doing the same thing again and again. You're also kind of tweaking things as you go along. I someone who spends a lot of time thinking about, okay, this is how this went. What would I change? What would I keep the same? Or you're a person who's generally pretty clear about what you're going to do?
No, always. And this is where I feel like that sort of synergy between what entrepreneurs do and what actors do comes in, is because if you're not taking that feedback, reassessing, and then changing your, I don't like to use business terms, but just for simplifying it, your strategy, it is the only way you're going to improve, because insanity is sort of doing the same thing over and over, expecting the same result, right? So it's pretty much the same process after every audition, that if it went well and you were selected, what did I do right? If not, what did I do wrong? And it could be something as simple as, I went to this audition straight after like 1 hour at the gym. Should I not be like in that state, like chemical mind balance state when I go, and should I rest 2 hours? And do I connect with myself better when I'm, 2 hours of rest, have an afternoon nap, and then go? Because acting a lot, and especially in performance stage, it's like a sport. Like you want to bring your A game to it. And in order to get to, hey, what is because there are very few books on how do you like ace acting in Bombay? The 10 rules of acing acting in Bombay. But what you draw from is like things where you find parallels. I've had the benefit of doing a bunch of films where I played sports, like in sports films, characters. So how do you draw from what it is that sportsmen do, what entrepreneurs do, and sort of make your own toolkit out of that?
So what can you tell us about your toolkit, since you mentioned that? So I'm fascinated with the term toolkit because it's something which I always...
Right.
I don't think we're all born with toolkits or instruction manuals. We kind of almost write our own instruction manual as we go along in life. And part of that is the toolkit we build for ourselves to be able to do what we do, but also to constantly kind of evolve and build on that. What are things you've added to your toolkit since you come to Bombay? Let's pick it up from that.
That could be a series of podcasts that we can do. We can just call it the toolkit and then go on and on and on. But what I love about what you said is that there's no one size fits all. And that's the beautiful thing about Bombay. Like I could meet the biggest superstar and sit down with him for a master class. But what worked for him, if I was to map those exact steps, will not work for me. And what worked for me possibly will not work for the next generation or even a contemporary. And because it's so much like right time, right place, it's so much like, it's so individualistic is what makes it beautiful. But I remember one of the books that really influenced me when I came into Bombay was Al Pacino's biography. And one of the beautiful things that he says, it's not only your toolkit for acting, like your method for acting, it's your method for life. It's how you handle it. And an actor is not what he does during the 100 days that he shoots. It's what he does in the 260 days that he doesn't, that makes him. And when I really pull back and look at what actors do, and I can't remember now who it was. I've seen this in some interview, and where an Indian actor has said that actors are actually paid to wait. Either you're waiting for the shoot to start. When the shoot starts, you're waiting in the vanity van for the shot to happen. Once the shoot is done, then you're waiting for the post. Then you're waiting for the release. You're waiting. So it's like how you handle that either makes or breaks you. So that would be number one on my toolkit is like handling the wait. And if anyone's got advice on this, please reach out to me because I'm still sort of trying to figure it out. But as unsettling as it is, it's also the most exciting thing. I think everyone, and this is one parallel that I can draw between creative people who come to Bombay. You're here because, where if you think adventure is scary, try routine. It's like that classic saying, right? So if I had a structured 9 to 5 where I was meeting the same people every day, it would, that's like the end. So it's a sort of light and shadow.
There's beauty to the chaos. Right? There's beauty to that chaos as long as you embrace it and you also don't submit to it.
Yeah.
Is what I feel the best kind of realizes that it's not because you're surrounded by chaos, and this city can be chaotic
Yeah.
function, and this industry can be the same thing.
Yeah, one of the
But
favorite films that I've seen, which sort of summarizes what the industry can be like, is Argo. I don't know if you've seen it,
Yeah,
the
it's
Ben
an Argo,
Affleck,
yeah.
where they're going and pitching this fictional concept to a producer. And I think one of the lines, I'm paraphrasing here, but is like, so you want to go and give a guy who's delusional an idea that doesn't exist for him to fund something with money that he doesn't have. And that's pretty much how you live in like this fictional reality where everyone's trying to get something done and something made.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just beautiful. It is organized chaos at the end of it.
And within that chaos, how does one do two things? And we can take this one by one. Is you're in that chaos, but you're also in that wait, which when you said waiting, I can visualize each of those because I've seen those on sets for so long. How do you then kind of come in front of camera and switch on when you need to? Because I mean, acting as a process has always fascinated me because I'm like, I've always been fascinated by seeing how does someone really switch on into a certain personality at that moment,
Yeah.
or is that almost a constant? So it's almost like not just what acting kind of means, but what it kind of means to you as an individual artist. So how do you look at that part?
That's just a beautifully put question, man, because it's never like addressed like that. The switching on, I'm someone who I'm not very religious, but I am spiritual in the sense that I believe like that there is an energy, and I just believe that something happens. Like I wish I could bring it down to maths, and I've never really met an actor who could, but something happens. But there is like preparedness that goes into making that something happen, and that's where the prep comes in. And I would like to believe like 70% is prep, and then 30% is what, if like I call it energy, people call it flow, some people call it being in the zone, but to get to that zone it's 70% prep. And it always amuses me when someone says, hey, do you know your lines? Because knowing your lines is like literally the basement of getting to the penthouse, and that's where you start off getting the groundwork out. And as far as the weight is concerned, I'm very good at, again, like I said, spending time by myself, and I much rather be in the vanity, or even if it's just a corner in the set, like observing what's going on and trying to remain bubbled in that world for that moment, so that when the camera comes on, you're living that reality. And I don't know how much fiction you've shot, but very often for me as a performer, like to the extent that if there's a camera in front of me, I would on a utopian, like in an ideal perfect set, you don't even want people walking in the background, because what happens is on great sets, what happens if you see sets that understand that, you'll have people who are dressed in black, is so that even if they happen to be walking, the light is not reflecting off them, so you're not being taken out of that world. And so it's such a balance between being prepped and holding on to the flow or the energy, that it's beautiful. And we were talking about earlier about how your toolkit evolves. I think what also happens as like the School of Knox in Bombay teaches you, is that acting and what it means to you starts to evolve. Like initially, when you're again in your mid-20s, it's about that outside in sort of impulse that's coming. Like everything that's glamorous about it and everything that's cool and sexy about it sort of attracts you. But then very soon you realize that it has to be an inside out process as well. Like if you're not legit feeling it, the audience doesn't know what's missing or what makes a person a good actor or a bad actor, but they know because the camera doesn't lie. And that comes from, which is like the hardest thing to hold on to, authenticity, which I constantly strive to get. Sometimes I manage, sometimes I don't.
Because it's so easy, I'm guessing, to just kind of like go on cruise control, right? I think in some cases, and I like the fact you said the audience knows, because sometimes you can see it, and I feel you feel it as well. I remember a couple of years ago, I used to host a business podcast, and one of the reasons I stopped doing it because I felt like I was just doing cruise control. I was doing it because I could just do it. But I wasn't doing it because I was really feeling it and doing it. And so it almost felt like a moment of saying, is this what I really want to do? And that kind of led to this show happening, because you know it as more than anybody else. You know that you kind of cruising through it. You're not bringing that extra in there.
And I feel like when you boil it down to the psychology of that feeling, I feel like as human beings, we are explorers. Like we do not, as much as like you would like to believe that what we crave is stability, we don't crave stability. What we crave is progress.
Yeah.
And if we're not seeing that progress in our environment, in our heart, in our soul, it doesn't work. You feel that sense of stagnation, and most people have different names for that stagnation, of lethargy or bored with work or depression or whatever it is that they're feeling. But you do very tangibly feel that. So yeah, like I totally get what you mean. Yeah.
So one of my mentors when I first came to Bombay and through the early years, even my entrepreneur journey, is Roshan Abbas would always tell me this is like, you need to be like the Rock of Gibraltar on roller skates, which I feel is the perfect analogy for how there's stability, but there's progress.
Yeah.
And there's chaos as well, because I can just imagine that visual and it just being that
and
way.
it's such a dichotomy, right? Because for that progress to happen, you have to let go of your comfort zone, and you have to let go of stability, which is why it's so great that one of the things that an entrepreneurial journey or an actor's journey teaches you is every time you feel like you've arrived, there's another step to arrive at, and that's what's cool about it and unnerving.
You just used the word cool. I have to bring this up. It came up in research.
Yeah.
And there's a unique connection which I have with this, is the fact that you once owned the cool chain from Kuch Kuch Hota Hai.
Are we seriously talking about this on like a podcast that is titled?
I bring
Take a
this up
Pause?
because I too owned the cool chain from Kuch Kuch
Oh,
Hota Hai.
great! We should have worn it at the podcast, man. Like we should have. Yeah.
I don't think I still have it, but did you wear it publicly or you just had it?
I wore it to school, yes, on the basketball court, because
I
that
wore it
is
to
where
school
was
as well.
worn. Yeah. So I think anyone who was a '90s kid who was not heavily influenced / inspired by SRK, and
That's true.
I'm from Delhi. I went to Delhi University as he did. It was I just feel like you didn't have a childhood in India if that wasn't part of your growing up.
Yeah, I think that period it defined a lot, everything, right? It defined how we would cut our hair, what we would wear.
Yeah.
That chain, unfortunately, for me, did not go well, because I went to boarding school wearing that chain, and that is the worst.
Like
That is the
a
worst
year
thing
of
to do.
ragging.
First day of hostel ever
Yeah.
is me wearing the cool chain from Kuch Kuch Hota Hai. So
Where was this? Where was the hostel?
this is in Bangalore.
Damn,
Let's just
so that is
say
the opposite of a Bollywood environment.
So let's just say it did not end well for me. That chain was swiftly hidden away,
Right.
but always got pulled out whenever people had to make fun of me.
Nice. I, on the other hand, wore it in Chandigarh. So I was asked where I got it from. So very different
It
experiences.
was called Archie's Gallery,
Exactly.
who made so much money from that one chain.
Yeah.
No, I had to go to that digression because I feel it's also the stuff that we are fascinated by, stuff which gravitates towards us, which are smaller parts of our personality. Like coffee is a thing for you, right? You really enjoy your coffee. You worked as a barista.
I
briefly.
did. So when I was in Australia, in Melbourne, you get a student visa and you also get a work permit.
Yeah.
And again, because I've grown up on my dose of Bollywood, the thing to do when you go abroad is to work in a cafe, because that's what every Karan Johar movie has taught you. Turns out it's more romantic in the movies
of course.
than it is when you actually get there. But also the flip side of it is
So wait, did you learn how to do the flour and the thing on the coffee, the cappuccino?
I didn't get to that level. That's like another evolved level. There are stages of and the Italian cafes, they take their coffee very, very seriously.
Sorry, I cut you. You were saying something.
I said it's way more romantic in the movies, as is everything.
Yeah.
And what it teaches you is a whole lot more respect for people who are working in hospitality, because one of the most challenging work experiences I've had is standing on your feet behind the counter of a coffee shop on a Sunday when everyone else is there to like have breakfast and have a good time. So it's just like that much more respect for people who do that for a living.
What do you think that taught you, which you kind of like held on to?
No job is too small, for sure, and independence.
Yeah. Because it's these smaller jobs, it's these smaller instances, stuff we have references to.
Yeah.
Hence the cool chain reference that came up.
Yeah.
And that all adds up into the process you have and how you function as you get older and you get into what you believe is what you are doing in life.
What your personality is.
What your personality
at
is
the
in that
moment.
sense.
Yeah.
Do you find yourself to be someone who still grapples with self-doubt?
Self-doubt. That's a heavy one. I think if you're somebody who thinks, if you're somebody who's analytical, there will always be self-doubt. And I feel like if I've and I just assume what you mean is when it comes to being an actor and acting. And
Yeah.
I think there will always be self-doubt. If I have, and Pankaj Tripathi, who's like an amazing actor, and he was a co-star, and we shared a lot of time on the sets of a film I did, told me this. He said, like, the day you give a shot and you come back home and you feel like, aaj to maine फाड़ दिया, मतलब I've done the best that I can, is the day you stop being an actor. And I thought that was a great way to look at it, because because with that overconfidence comes the complacency. So yes, there are definitely moments of self-doubt, and what we do as actors is sort of put yourself out there. You be vulnerable. You try and let go of the ego, and then you're so open to judgment, both positive and negative. And no matter how strong you try and be about it, you can get those 10 great comments, but you get that one bad one. It will make you think
Question,
for a second time. Yeah.
And judgment's such a tricky slope, right? Because someone might just make one statement, but then you as an individual keep adding more and more onto it. It becomes much larger than it actually was.
Judgment is are we allowed to say that?
You can say that.
Yeah, because like there are two forms of judgment, right? There are judgments of like your audience or like people, and then there's self-judgment. Like I feel like, and all spirituality or all like any text will teach you this, like the more harmful one is what you think of yourself. And that's been like sort of one of the biggest learnings that I got over the past 10 years, is that if you live your life based on what it is that other people, the stimulus that you're getting from your environment, you will constantly be at the mercy of what other people are thinking. What's in your control is that judgment of yourself. And that's where true power lies. So if there is self-doubt, it has to be controlled from there. It never can be that I wish one day people are going to stop commenting negatively or not liking something that I post or do. And that's never going to happen.
Yeah. And there's this lovely line in Stoicism, right? I think it was Seneca who said this. He says that, are you being a good enough friend to yourself?
Yeah.
Which I think is so true, because it's the same outward in which you're saying, right? It's like if you inwardly are being, because you always talk about how you should be with other people, but how you're being with yourself.
Yeah. And I think with that, the latter flows into the former. How you are with yourself is how you'll be with other people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And no place kind of encompasses this almost conflict as social media does.
Yeah.
Because I'm gathering there was a time for actors to, you getting into that frame of mind, you playing a character, then you can switch off and kind of go on. But now you are also at some point, I think for everybody in the world now, we are also playing a version of who we are online.
Yeah. I feel like, in a manner of speaking, everyone's acting now.
Everyone's acting.
Yeah.
Everyone's performing for technology. Because someone the other day said that, do you think because of AI and everything else, the machines will take over? I said, machines already taken over. They're making you dance to random videos and putting it on their platforms.
Yeah.
So we already are dancing to technology's tunes.
Yeah.
What's your relationship with social media like?
Again, this could again be a series of other like podcasts that we do of like what's your relationship with. So before we get on to this, I feel like it's important to list that there has been a lot of good that has come out of like social media. Like, and just to start off, like when I came to Bombay, which wasn't so long ago, just how difficult it used to be to get your photograph to a production house or a casting director used to be a task, because you would need to make sure that you send the email. The email will obviously not go to them directly. It will go to some assistant's assistant. Then you hopefully get a face-to-face meeting. And it's just made putting out, and I'm talking strictly from an artist and actor's point of view, is putting out material out there for people to see that much easier. Meaningful content like the one we're doing at the moment, hopefully, is also easier to get to people, which would have been difficult. I'm listing these out because the answer to that question of what's your relationship shouldn't like it
only be negative.
I don't want
it's
to
not
like
only negative.
bash. It's only so there's been, but like I feel like what's interesting about the chat we're going to get into is that the both of us, having like being from like 90s kids, have grown up in an era where we've seen a pre-social media phase of life, and we're that generation that was pre-internet, then internet. We've done High Five, Orkut, and then Facebook, and it's a very
wow. I haven't heard someone say hi-fi in a long time.
Yeah. So, and we forget, and it's really easy to forget. And it's a very interesting perspective into what's going on now, because it's so easy to feel like, hey, this is it. This is the way it's going to be. And of course it is. Like it's inevitable that it's only going to progress from here. But how did we get here and where are we at is a very interesting question. So because I said High Five and Orkut, there used to be a time when social media this was part of what I studied in Melbourne as well. Like when I did film and media, it was about your interaction with technology. So some of this comes from there. Was initially meant to put out media content and to engage people, for them to have a social experience. So I don't know if you remember this or people listening to this remember, but there was a time between 2003 and 2007 where all you had was you would put up a picture or a video on Facebook, and then you had a comment section and people would comment. And it's so funny, but this one small piece of code changed the way we do things now. And that piece of code was the like button. And this fascinated me. And so I very recently read about the history of what it was. Is that the brand teams and the business teams on social media platforms realized that when people would write only comments on pictures or on videos, they couldn't gauge which post was better or more popular than the other. And so while some people would write paragraphs of what their opinion on a particular topic was, most people they found would just write awesome, great, good, like, super like. And so to take a bunch of those and how do you make it into one thing? And then that one thing helped the algorithm track which is more popular. And that's how news feeds were created. And that's how then brand pages and then everything. And that one invention of a 26-line code changes the game forever. The second thing after the like button, so what you've done is you've commodified media. The minute you put that like button in, is the counter. Can you imagine what the world would have been like if there was only a like button, but you couldn't see how many likes? Then they put a counter. And this counter wasn't something that they put behind the scenes only for developers to see. People could see it. So now you've gone from a media that was meant to be an engagement social platform to a counting contest to a popularity game. And that's where we are today. And because we've grown up in a generation where data was expensive, where smartphones were not easily accessible, we've now gone to pretty much free data and for accessible phones. We're in a different phase altogether. And what makes it interesting when I engage with it is I'm very conscious of when I'm on screen, I'm a performer. When I'm promoting, I'm on a PR or a promotion thing. When I'm doing a styled photo shoot, I've got a brand on board that's doing clothes. There's a photographer. But now there's that thing of like, now you've got to be yourself and you've got to create it. So it's just, and it's inevitable. I'm not saying that, hey, I'm not going to do it. We're all part of this vicious cycle. And I think like where you draw the line is that how authentic do you think you're being to what you stand for? And that is so subjective.
It's, you got to draw those lines for yourself, right? And it's something which I feel it's more unique for us who grew up pre-internet.
Yeah.
Because in reality, we understand what truly authentic means because we didn't have to do it for a camera.
Man, if it was truly authentic, it wouldn't be on camera. So let's start from there.
And it's slowly from that, it's and I'm fascinated by this also because I'm like, what would happen if someone didn't have their phone, right? Would you do the same things? Me also, because of film school, I'm like, one second, if I'm shooting something of myself at home, I'll place the camera like I would place it for like if I'm shooting just like a documentary and forget about it and then go about doing what I'm doing. But is that the process everybody else follows? But at the center of it all is, I think what you hit on was the like and the counter is the fact that you're doing everything to get that one extra dopamine hit of that like or that extra number there. And then that takes away from, it's not just about what's authentic, but what's authentic and will get that extra like or that extra counter. Which makes this whole thing such a, if you think about it, if you talk to someone in the 1980s about this, they'll be like, what is this? It doesn't make any, it sounds crazy. And I'm sure in the future it'll be this dystopian period where they say social media will be equated to smoking.
I really feel so. Not smoking, but I feel like it would be like the way we look at the generation that could smoke on aircraft. Like we were like, what? You could smoke on aircraft? I feel like future generations are going to look at us like that, of the kind of crazy stuff. But just a couple of examples that came to mind from what you said was, I was on a run on a beach just last weekend and at a distance, and it was like cloudy and it was great weather and windy at the same time. And I saw this couple and their foreheads were touching. And they were just dancing by themselves. And I said, wow, and that's amazing. It's 8 a.m. on a weekend and they're dancing. And I got closer and I tried to keep my distance so not to intrude like this amazing, beautiful moment that they had. And as I got closer, suddenly I saw that then their heads parted, and then one of them bent down. They put the record button off. They turned away with their back to the beach and then walked off. And so that's what it sort of picks up from where. The other thing that happened just about 2 weeks ago, where I was in a showroom in a mall, and I had a couple of clothes that I wanted to try, and I went into the changing room, and there were these two kids. One guy would come out of the changing room in the outfit that he was trying. The other person would take pictures in those looks. He would go in, change again, come out. He would take pictures, and it struck me then that these are people who probably either don't want to buy or cannot afford the showroom that they're in. But social media has conditioned them in a way where they have to put up looks on their profile, and so they're like, can you imagine? Like it's a generation, or you've created people who need to do that, and so to not realize the impact it can have on a generation that hasn't seen a before and after, or to a section of society for whom it isn't only aspirational, it's just beyond what their wildest dream is. It just creates the kind of questions and insecurities that wouldn't otherwise have existed.
And just to add to what you said, the one piece to kind of take out of this, which is that it's allowing people to get that platform, which they didn't have before. Like everybody's a performer from the corners of the world, and suddenly everybody has access to an audience.
Yeah.
But what it also does, and there's this fabulous book called The Creative Act, which Rick Rubin wrote, and it's one of my favorite books of the last couple of years. And I keep going back to it, and he talks about the fact that everybody is creative.
Yeah.
We just have different ways to express it. But one of the things you always have to remember is that the creative is at the core of it. And the numbers, everything else kind of comes as almost like a part of that process. You might get it today, you might not get it tomorrow, but if you don't constantly focus on the craft and focus on how to kind of enhance that, all these other things will never give you, because eventually what we want from all of this is happiness and satisfaction, and obviously everything else that comes along with
that's
it.
It's absolutely right. And it's a very evolved way of looking at it. And I hope that more and more people, especially a generation of influencers, gets to that that conclusion.
Do you find yourself thinking about how to stay balanced through all of this?
Constantly. And I think that is where the growth is, because it's such a dichotomy, right? Like you're talking about staying true to your core and being authentic, and as an actor on set, that means being vulnerable. That means letting go of your ego. That means not judging the part that you have. And then there is the perception of an actor and a star, of the brand that comes with that for better or for worse, does involve a projection and does involve like an outward this thing. So it's a constant balancing act that you have to do. And again, one's not giving opinion on social media at the moment saying that, hey, that it should stop existing. I benefit off of social media, as does anyone else, because acting and films it's show business. It is a commercial craft at the end of it. And so there are times when it's the kind of immediacy that you've got with your audience is incredible, where you can put up a series on Netflix and then you're getting instant feedback from an audience in Argentina and Spain. And I've traveled to Istanbul, where there are people who are from non-English speaking countries who have come up and said, really liked your show. So it's done things that possibly 10 years ago would not have been imaginable. But with this constant balance that we're trying to get to the bottom of, is that it's a knowing yourself game, it's a vulnerability and authenticity game, versus how much of it do you use for the purpose of getting out there, for lack of a better word.
If I go back to the point when you kind of came to Mumbai, you said School of Hard Knocks. I want to keep using that term. I haven't used that in a while. I haven't heard that in a while also. I'm like, it's gone back to it. And there's also this entire part about rejection that you end up facing. Right? There's going to be a constant stream of that happening, which almost, I'd say some people use it, says it's grounding, but it also can really kind of pull away at you. And then there was a point when you kind of get your first slightly larger role, and then from then on you progress. But do you feel like your relationship with rejection is a constant? Is that something which happens? I think that everyone's lives, it's not like it's happened only till that point, but there will always be things that will...
Always.
But does it hit you differently?
First of all, very quickly in the game, like I said, Bombay tests you. So if you don't make peace with rejection and learn how to adapt to it, that could be a downer very, very early on. Yeah. And so for me, my sort of coping mechanism, I think it was Bryan Cranston who said that you don't realize that people think that the acting job is about managing to get the role and being on set. The job is the audition. If you've got the opportunity, and this was in the early days, to go in front of a camera with a casting director or producer or director and give that audition, that's a good day, because that is the job. So one, just to see it as part of the process. Yeah. And then the second thing was to see every rejection, and I hope this helps anyone who's listening, is we often interpret it, possibly because that's the kind of educational system we've grown up in, as a right answer and a wrong answer. So we see a rejection as a not, won't happen, not now. I always took it as a not yet. And just that change of terminology, in regardless of what you're trying to do, whether it's business or art, is that not yet just says that we'll try again tomorrow. And I think that acts as and as far as the relationship with rejection goes, that's an ongoing process. And it's just that I think I can very safely say this, of regardless of where in the hierarchy you are of the industry, you go through it in different phases. You just elevate to the next phase, and then it's again reinventing, recoping.
Right. You mentioned the audition, and I feel it's one of those things which people don't necessarily talk about as much, is the fact that it is an extremely unnerving experience to be in. When I earlier referenced that at one point in time I tried to be.
Yeah. So you've done auditions.
I once auditioned, by the way, and I can say this for people.
You once auditioned? I once
auditioned for a Yash Raj film, for a YRA film. So there's some
starting to understand why I'm here. Yeah, the lights will go off. It will become an interrogation. What happened to that audition day?
No, I don't know where that is, but I still vividly remember that for me it was one of those things like, let's try these things out, let's try this one out, and I just came out of it saying that was like intense for me as an individual, because you've been on sets and you see that there are other people to play off and there's stuff to do, but here it's just like you're in the spot, but it's also like you're in the spot in a very different way. And I'm sure for a lot of people, when they get into that for the first time, it's also like, one second, this is very different from what I thought it would be like.
No, absolutely, because so much of it is, and if you're new to Bombay and you're just doing auditions, it's not like you're going to walk into the office and you're going to be the first person to audition. You're going to be in a waiting room or a line outside where there are 50 people who look exactly like you do, or are a variation of like what you are. So that question of self-doubt that you said really creeps in, because how you're talking, and this is an adaptation from sports psychology, which is like so much of how you talk to yourself in that moment. And again, this was like a method that like adapted and evolved over the years, is important, because if you're telling yourself at that point, shit, that person is taller than I am, that person looks like they've got more experience than I do, by the time you get in a 1 hour wait, you've already lost the game. So how you're talking to yourself is so important. And what people don't realize is that by the time you reach the phase of being on set, if you've been through an auditioning process, that is the easiest part of the job, because over here, everyone, those 200 people are there to make sure that you do the best possible job that you can do. So I've always found it funny in the early days when people would tell you before a shoot, best of luck, because the best of luck was needed 2 months ago when you were in round 3 of that audition. So it's extremely unnerving, and I wish I could say that you get more and more comfortable with it every time, but it's that whole thing of like, you're nervous or you're anxious because you care. And this was a beautiful thing that an acting coach once told me, is that if you weren't nervous, means you don't care about it and the stakes aren't high enough for you. So hold on to some of that fear, but also know how to control it.
How do you use the word nervousness? How do you deal with being nervous? Because it's also like there'll be a lot of stuff going on in your head through process of acting, while you're waiting, everything else. And do you have things that you do to kind of take a pause to plug in for the shows, but also to kind of calm yourself and kind of bring yourself to that spot?
Yeah, it's a great question, because so much of it, and I don't think this is only acting relevant. I think like anyone in Bombay or any creative person, it's so relevant of how do you take the pause. And I stumbled on this completely by accident. I had a gym injury because of which normally used to be my place of calming the nerves, or like just where you cut off everything else, music or an audio book, and you're at the gym. And I had this injury where I was told like for a month and a half, I can't go to the gym. And that for someone who and what people don't realize is like when you're an actor, it sort of becomes your it's your goalpost of how you're starting your day. It's like sort of one of the to-do lists in your routine, and it's so essential to have that kickstart. People do different things. Some people journal, some people grab a cup of coffee. Like for me, it was like get up, grab something to eat, and then go to the gym. And when that's taken away from you, you're looking for something else. And that is how I discovered yoga. And it went from just a form of exercise that wasn't as strenuous, which I realized later was the most superficial way of looking at yoga, to something that I found like really helps to center you. Because I remember coming out of that first yoga class saying that, hey man, I feel energized. And no matter how good a session you've had at the gym, you do feel a bit tired when you come out. Like, you wouldn't instantly want to say like, hey, let's go like run like two kilometers now. But after the yoga class, I came out feeling almost like consciousness had expanded and you feel a little more alive. And I was like, what is that feeling? Let's get deeper into it. And so as a complete like series of the mistakes that got me there, it went from alternate exercise to something that centers you, to something that helps you while you're acting, to now just a lifestyle choice where you take out time in the week. It might not be every day, but it helps you definitely. It's the most natural way that you can do get centered. And meditation, of course.
There's something beautiful about yoga, like you said, is that it starts off like you think it's exercise, but it's actually a lot more than that. It's actually what you turn to when you want to kind of feel like you want to flow, but you still don't want to just sit in one spot. Like I can't meditate to as much as I try. I have too much of a scattered mind to do that. And I find yoga to be simpler.
Yeah, I'm exactly the same, which is why I use like an audio prompt. Like I need someone to say, okay, breathe now, breathe out, which could help anyone who's watching this to sort of get started. But it's the same. Like if I sit down, like on any given day, there are so many questions running that you find it hard to sort of remain still. But you're right. Like there's such a profound sense of knowingness that comes from yoga that it's difficult to explain to someone who's never experienced it or done it.
One more thing which I was just running through all the characters you played, and there was initially a lot of characters which had, let's say, call them negative characters and you progress, but it's always been characters which had a certain level of intensity to them. And sometimes to channel intensity but yet not make it seem, there's over the top intensity which is can become caricaturist, can become like that, but there's also like a way to kind of radiate intensity without it being obvious. Is that something you've been able to naturally do, or is that something you kind of worked on?
Something you said beautifully earlier about like personality and how you subconsciously imbibe so many things from your environment. I think the same thing comes to when it's acting. And a lot of the influences when I was in college or in acting school came from that kind of stuff that I watched. So I watched a lot of work that Al Pacino had done. There's a film called Dog Day Afternoon. There's also Scarface, which is slightly over the top, but again, like there are moments of control there. Then there's Marlon Brando, there's Jack Nicholson, Dustin Hoffman, like all of these greats, Robert De Niro, who teach you the art of stillness, but there's a fierceness in that stillness. And closer to home, of course, there's Amitabh Bachchan sir, and then there's Irfan Khan, who sort of distilled it down. And I realized very quickly that the kind of performances that I was drawn to was acting like that. And people mistake intensity with either being an antagonist or being harsh. Or I've often said this, is that मैं तुम्हें जान से मार दूंगा और मैं तुम्हें जान से भी ज़्यादा मोहब्बत करता हूँ. Our opposite ends of intensity on the same sort of line is that loving someone passionately is equally intense. And you'll often see that the greatest actors can do both with equal intensity. Like Shah Rukh Khan can do Bazigar and Dar, and he can do DDLJ. And DiCaprio can do Catch Me If You Can, he can do Titanic. And that's what's amazing about intensity, is that it's malleable to regardless of what mask you're wearing.
Does it? But I've always liked to look at actors after they've finished a shot, especially if it's intense, and kind of see them. And I've always noticed that there is a certain level, and people might not even realize that it kind of also pulls away at you, right? There's a lot that gets pulled out of you, especially if you are performing in an intense scenario, but also like you holding it in, so it's not an outburst. Have you had those moments?
Yeah, a lot of them. Because like you said, like a lot of the parts that I played are intense. And it's funny because again, it's a yin and yang, because it's part of the joy of doing it. Like you want to get a part which pulls you so far away from your reality that you feel like you're embodying something in someone else. And that's what I've had the benefit of doing a lot of different parts like that. But then you realize maybe when you go back home and you get a phone call, and it could be a phone call where let's say you don't agree with what's being said. And there have been times when I have responded in a way and then later felt like that isn't me. That's coming from the part that I played earlier today, where where you've got like this very gangster reaction, and the person's gotten really startled on the other end, and ironically like what I wanted happened. But it was because that was like on-screen gangster talk. And it's something that you have to be very aware of, again, of yourself, of the part you're playing, and then what effect it's having. And on average, I would say it takes about 10 days to 2 weeks to sort of let that get out.
Yeah. If you had a turnaround to yourself when you first came to Bombay now, the things that you would tell yourself, and what would you change?
This is making me feel really old. This is
No,
a lifetime achievement kind
lifetime
of
achievement,
really
yes,
lifetime
no, but
achievement award.
Even if it's like a few years, I'm sure there's always a lot of things to tell ourselves.
Yeah. Now again, great question. I guess like be more patient, because like especially when you first come to Bombay, you come with all of that angst and that urgency to this has to happen. And sometimes when I look back at it now, like those years of like that, the maximum growth happens in the period when you're trying to make it happen. And that's where all of it's sort of like you made the foundation of the things you apply now. So be more patient. Again, like this beautiful Insta meme that I read, which sort of applies, is nothing that's meant for you will ever pass you by. And I wish I could tell myself that from 10 years ago.
And through this process, I know you mentioned one piece of advice you got, but was there a piece of advice that you got that stuck with you?
A great piece of advice that I got in the very beginning, because when I came saying I want to be an actor, there are a lot of questions of should I start with just being on a set as an intern? Should I get a regular in a production house, see how things work? And the advice that I got was that if you've come and you've come with a focus, then do just that. Because in Bombay, it's easy to make a decent living, but to make it doing exactly what you want to do, that is the challenge. And I think that was very important for a 22-year-old to hear, because otherwise it's very easy here to get lost in doing different things that you might or might not find creative, but to be finding meaning in what you're doing is the challenge.
Yeah, you can very easily forget why you came here in the first place and become something else altogether.
Yeah. I mean, but that could happen even in doing the dream that you chase, which is why that reality check, that self-introspection is a constant game.
Thank you so much for doing this. This has been a fascinating conversation, just because we went into so many different streams of things. And thank you for coming on, and hope to get you back to continue some of the topics which you said can become multiple podcasts.
Yeah, we should do a series at some point.
So look forward to getting you back on the show.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for having me. This has been amazing.
Likewise.